Hello, welcome to Wacom Creativity Camp. We're so excited to have you, and we're extremely excited to have Odunze Oguguo, also known as Whyt Manga, here um, for this very first workshop of our Creativity Camp series, Draw a Manga Page from Scratch. Whyt Manga, um, who, as most of you probably know, is a YouTuber with a ton of subscribers, as well as a manga and comic creator. He's a co-founder of My Footprint Entertainment, LLC, and is the creator of Apple Black, which is a manga that was traditionally published worldwide on Saturday AM. Odunze Oguguo is also an art director for Sandstorm Comics in United Arab Emirates. Apple Black Origins is a light novel prequel to the Apple Black manga series that was just released in June, and Volume 5 of Apple Black will be released in October. Let's get into it.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for the introduction, and shout out to Wacom for having me and having me be a part of creativity camp for this year. And like he mentioned, or like they mentioned, we're going to be going over how to create a manga page from scratch using Clip Studio Paint with my trusty Wacom here. This is actually a Cintiq 22-inch, I believe, if I'm counting correctly. But hopefully you guys will be able to follow along if you want. But if you don't want to, if maybe you don't have your stuff in front of you, you'll be able to follow along regardless. Usually for me when learning in this kind of format, it's best to kind of have it side by side. And you guys will be able to ask questions as I'm plowing through all the stuff and figuring out everything. So I have all of this figured out in parts. Usually going into it, you want to create a manga page. Usually you're doing this for a purpose. You're telling a story. So you probably want to be able to create multiple pages. And the first thing that comes into mind is you want to have your idea. And for the purposes of this workshop, it's going to be a very basic, straightforward idea where I'm going to, and this is something I just came up with it like maybe a couple hours ago, for this specifically, but it could be anything you guys want, right? And here, I wanted something where maybe a character is stopping another character just to relay a message. And that, on some level, that might be all we need from an idea standpoint. You go in deeper when you want to tell a story and you have principles and morals and the things that make it unique and thinking about how it's going to be executed, all that stuff, making sure it's an interesting, engaging story and all of that. But we're not going to go into deep about all of that. We just want to know the basics. And usually that's a good way to start before you take a deeper dive into more ambitious stuff, right? So here, these are my little templates that I've manually created. You'll be able to find them on my Gumroad if you want as well. It's the same name, Whyt Manga. But these are just templates that you can create for yourself, so you don't really need these. So these are, like I said, these are just templates that you can make yourself, or you find mine and my Gumroad, same name, Whyt Manga. And the goal here is to take that idea and then create a storyboard or a thumbnail or a name. It has many names, but it doesn't really matter what you call it. The point here is to create the blueprint of what the layout of the comic is going to be, right? And so for me, my idea is a character stopping another character as they're going up some stairs or steps, whatever. And as the character turns, character A stops character B on the stairs, and maybe two other panels where character A is then relaying the message, and then character B is receiving that message. A lot of times with manga pages, you want to have good pacing. You want each panel to have a purpose, and that kind of helps dictate how many panels you're going to have on a page. A good um a good average is like maybe four to six panels per page. But there are times where you might want to push that to even 10. Really, there aren't any rules. If that's going to be a takeaway, let that be one of the things you take away from this workshop. There aren't really any rules, but there's some go-tos, and those have their purposes for existing, right? You don't want too many panels on a page because then everything can be too congested. And then maybe you don't want too few panels on a page because then maybe you're wasting space and you're wasting page and everything is just too slow. So as long as you can justify the decisions that you're making for creating whatever you're creating, you should be good, right? And again, I highly recommend you also look at creators that have influenced you and see what they're doing and try to put yourself in their shoes to make that decision. So I've just justified the existence, why we should do 3 panels. If I come up with anything else, I'll add to it, which lets you know, again, it's a very flexible stage, right? We're not actually making the page yet. We're still thinking about it. And so nothing is set in stone until it's published or whatever, right? So if I decide to add another panel, I can, but to make things easier, you want to decide all of that in the storyboard phase versus when you're actually making the manga page, because then it might be more difficult to make those kind of gigantic edits. So usually, a little extra tip here. With Clip Studio Paint, I have my layers. You can see what they are. This is just what I'm going to do for the sketching. I usually go to Real G Pen over here. It doesn't really matter which one you use. This is one I'm comfortable using, and it's default. I didn't get it. It automatically comes with Clip Studio Paint. So that's the Real G Pen, and that's on this layer right here. And then these are just, like I said, the created templates. You can create your own. They can be hand drawn. It doesn't matter much yet. One thing to keep a note is when unless you're working in scroll format or web comics or stuff like that kind of scroll format that you see on like a webtoon or Tapas or something like that. If you're working with a page flipping type, books, you want to know where your left and your right page is going to go, because then with this guide here, with this template, you can see this faded line here. This is what I like to call the live area. And in the live area, that's where you want text to be. Any kind of text, anything that's supposed to be readable, that's where you want it to be, like any important text, right? Maybe they're walking into a gym and then the title of the gym, showing in the image. That could be at the edges, it doesn't matter. But like stuff that's supposed to definitely be read, you want that to be in the live area. And so these are both live areas, right? Then when you're creating your panels, you want the panels usually to be created within that live area. Another reason why this exists is that if it's then going to be printed, parts of the pages are going to be cut out, right? So you want to make sure important text is in that live area. Important art as well should be in the live area, but you're able to get away with that outside of the live area a little bit. But you still don't want it to be too close to the edges in case it gets cut off in print. Or here, between the left page and the right page, the gutter, you don't want things to get lost in the gutter, right? So you want the arts to be in the live area. If you guys can see, this is actually volume 1 of Apple Black, and the pages have all the text in the live area, right? Even though the arts can extend beyond, but the text should be in that live area, right? So you can have panels in here, all of that. Let's say we did 3 panels like so, they be within the live area. Now, there are times where you want to do something a little bit more chaotic. Maybe the scene itself is not a calm scene. It's, action-based, very dynamic. You can cut the panels in interesting ways. And then usually you decide these based off of the script that you make from your initial idea, right? And if we cut the panels like so, it can still be within the live area, but sometimes the panels can do what we call bleed. So the panels can bleed to the edge of the page. And that just means that, let's say if we bleed panel 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If we bleed panel 1, you can bleed it to the top and you can bleed it into the gutter. But usually you never want to bleed in the direction of the gutter. The gutter, again, is the page gutter is just in between both pages. They're panel gutters. Panel gutters are just, the spaces in between the panels, right? And you can have this is a horizontal panel gutter, and then this right here is a vertical panel gutter. And so you never want to bleed into the page gutter, again, because just in case art gets lost, the only time it's okay is when you're working, say, at a double spread, For a double spread page, you still want the text, any text, to still be within the live areas of each page, but the art can extend, you know. So here we have panel 1 extending across pages. But even if I did this, right, if I was drawing, let's say, a character punching, I will still try to make sure that maybe the punch and the impact is clearly in the other page and not something where it's lost in the gutter. You have to remain aware of that. So you can bleed to the page gutter, but it's not, you really need to know what you're doing, and it's not necessarily advised all the time. Or if your comic is going to exist exclusively online, then it doesn't matter. But if you ever want it to be printed, then you might have to come back and do some edits, right? So this is just good practice. And so you can bleed to the edge. Here I bleed just to the top and not to the page gutter for safety reasons. And you'd want to bleed maybe if you want to do something dynamic, maybe some really cool action is happening in panel 1. And then, maybe you bleed panel 2 as well. But see, panel 2, I can bleed to the right with no issues, and I can bleed to the top, right? Anytime I bleed a panel, I bleed fully. So here I bleed to the top and to the right. The only time I don't bleed fully is if it's going to be bleeding into the page gutter. So these are just a couple things to keep in mind. But usually, before getting ahead of ourselves, you have that idea, and I already explained what it's going to be. Character A stopping character B to convey a message. It could be, you could write that script. It could be something where we're just writing a one-page script, and you could write that however you want to write it. People have their own teams where you write it in such a way where everybody on the team understands what's happening, or you can write it with a format that's universal. Maybe you're writing it like a screenplay script, something that everybody can read is usually best. But if it's just you, then it doesn't really matter how you write it. You can write it in Google Docs, Word document, however, it's up to you. And so for this one, really, it would just be, I'll just be saying what would be written would just be like maybe page 1, character A stops character B at the stairs, at the steps, or whatever. And then I'll just, character A says whatever. I might even have it be interactive. You guys will see in real time. And then character B is just reacting. That's really it. I don't actually need to write out the script, but sometimes if it's an extensive chapter, multiple pages, it's best to have that sorted out because it helps organizing. You don't want to freehand everything, or it is best practice to write all these things down, especially if you're doing multiple pages.
Hey, Odunze, we have a question from chat asking, can you bleed going down as well?
Yes, you can bleed going down. One thing I recommend for everybody is to pick up your favorite manga. And every like I said, there aren't really any rules. You can do whatever you want to do. Just as long as you can justify why you're doing it, you should be good. 9 times out of 10. And it's always good to get feedback from credible sources, artists you look up to, and all that kind of stuff to get their feedback, and it will help develop your style as you develop, as you grow. So yes, you can bleed downwards, but again, here I wouldn't, bleeding fully for panel 4 would only be bleeding downwards. I wouldn't bleed into the page gutter for the reasons I mentioned earlier. And this is obviously if I were to bleed at all. Sometimes you don't want to bleed. Sometimes you want to keep everything calm and neat. And maybe that's a reflection of what's happening in the scene. At least for me, that's how I approach it. And so that's that. So once you have all this, you have your script, we're ready to go, right? So now let's actually storyboard this page. So usually, I don't know if anybody's familiar with Clip Studio Paint, but you can just a marquee tool, selection tool, whatever. I'm just selecting all this, getting rid of it. And again, on my Gumroad, where you can find the storyboard templates, you can also find already finished pages with all my layers in Clip Studio Paint, everything you need on there if you want that. So let's say this is page 1. We don't need a page 2, but whatever. Page 1, and let's say page 1 is let's say page 1. Let's say the page we're working on is page 2. that means the gutter is here, right? And I want something where page 1, it's kind of I'm imagining something where character A was chasing character B, and character B was unaware, and so they're stopping kind of in the middle of the stairs, looking back. So it's a little bit heavy breathing, not too dynamic, not too much action going on, but still something where maybe I want to slant the panel and not have it be exactly straight, just to show that the scene is a little chaotic. It could still be straight. It doesn't matter. But I'm just gonna push it a bit. And then I have space for the panel gutters. Usually, this is another thing you'll notice. Panel gutters that are more horizontal are usually thicker than the panel gutters that are vertical. It's more of like a cleaner readability of things. But it's one thing to keep note. But again, it's one of those rules that isn't really a rule. You can do whatever you want. Sometimes even some Western comics follow this, but not always. And even some Japanese comics don't follow it, but something to keep in mind. And something I'm sure you guys probably noticed as well. So here we have that. And then I'll have character, like I said, character B, then character A has a message for character B. And I'll just have that. And let's say for these, I don't bleed. Or maybe I bleed the one where the character is saying it in case he yells. So this is where they stop on the stairs, the message, and then reaction. Sometimes it can help to write things out. Sometimes this is already in the script, so it's easier for you. Some scripts would actually break it down into panels. It depends on the writer. If you're working with, let's say you're working with a writer, sometimes a writer would kind of write the script in such a way where they know exactly how many panels are going to be on a page. But then sometimes they'll let the artist just decide that. Like I said, really aren't any rules. A lot of times, especially when I was coming into it, I thought there was like a lot of fixed rules. Not too much, right? You have a lot more freedom than you think. It's all art at the end of the day. So that's what I'm imagining. So I can have, let's say, the character maybe somewhere here. He just finished running, and he maybe has hands to the knees. These are storyboards, so the art doesn't have to be, it can be very rough, right? And okay, it could just be here. A little bit of panting, and then I'll put the speech bubbles of like heavy breathing type stuff. And then maybe stairs, and then the other character kind of stopping and turning, kind of. And it's like still blah blah blah. Simple. We doing this just helps us visualize it, and then we can decide if the page works or not. Then you do this, and then the next page is maybe character A saying what he needs to say, and then character B, maybe character B kind of reacting. And that's it. That's it for the storyboarding. Now, keep in mind, there's something called the 180 rule. I'm not going to go into too much detail about that right here in this workshop, but it's done to keep the pages easier to follow. Where you have, if a character is on the left, so you have character A, B, A, B. So we have character A looking on the left, looking right, and he's on the left looking right, and you kind of want to keep that consistent throughout the scene. There are times where you break this 180 rule, but again, you just need to be able to justify your reason. This is done in film as well, where maybe a character, let's say two characters are playing chess, and the camera has character A looking left, character B looking right, character A on the left looking right, and character B doing the opposite, and they're consistent with that. But maybe they're playing chess, and then something happens where character A the whole time has been losing, but now they have the upper hand. Then maybe something happens, and you switch the 180 rule as a subtle, symbolic, whatever. You have that much freedom in comics here as well. So this is the storyboard, very basic, very simple. Now, what I like to do is I'll copy that. In fact, I'll keep this going. But the next thing you want to do is new. Let's now create the page. This is the main thing.
Hey, Odunze, before you get too deep into the next step, we had a couple questions
Yeah,
about
yeah.
how you plan and approach planning your kind of panel layout, the number, size, shape, um, whether you have a close-up shot or a far-away shot in different panels and things like that. And I know you covered that a little bit a moment ago, but if you could kind of briefly go over some of your thoughts about um, how you plan out the different kind of shots and the panels and stuff, that would be helpful to a couple folks who are in the chat.
Okay. I'll see what I can do briefly. And so this is an example of a page I was working on, and this was the storyboard for it. This was a storyboard for it. I wanted to do something where there are lots of things that go through your mind when you're creating a panel shot, whatever. And a lot of times you figure some of the stuff out in the script phase as well. So coming into this is page one. I wanted to make sure that the audience knows where the scene is taking place. You always want to make sure that's clear. So my panel one, which is called an establishing shot, and it just establishes where the scene is taking place. And occasionally throughout the scene, you still want to remind the audience here and there. You don't have to do it in every single panel, but every now and then, so your characters are not just floating in the matrix white space. You want to let them know, especially if the character is going to be interacting with that background or setting. So here it's the forest. So I have a shot of just really the sky and then a bunch of trees, right? And so it lets them know where the scene is taking place. And then some sound effects of like swords clashing to let them know, okay, it's in the scene and there's some kind of action happening. And then in the next panel, we have like a character dodging a slash, so we're jumping straight into the action. And the decision, the how I decide what panel is going to be, panel size wise, there's a hierarchy, right? Usually, the panel that gets the most room, the most space, the most capital is usually the most important panel. What's the most important panel? That's what you get to decide as a creator, and you get better with that as time goes on. Sometimes that could just be a panel where a character is relaying a message. So, for instance, if Star Wars was my comic, and in that scene where Vader reveals that he is the father, wherever that ends up in the comic, whatever page that is, the panel where he says that is probably going to be the biggest panel on that page. If not, maybe even the only panel on the page. There are times where you only want one panel to show true importance. It depends. It's all up to you. Another thing that happens a lot of times when you're constructing your layouts is you want to construct it in such a way where you're building tension to keep the reader flipping the pages. And when they flip the page, they go from page one, two, three, four. By the time that on page two, right, if you open a book, on page two, this page or this panel usually should make them want to flip it. You're building tension to make them flip the page and then reward them with some kind of revelation or something interesting. Reward them for flipping the page and continuing to flip the page. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Another thing is sometimes is the panels can be getting smaller. The smaller the panels, the more congested things can be, and that could help as things are getting smaller, it's becoming more tense, and then you can reveal in a big way. Here's another example right here. So these were the storyboards for 3 pages. This is still the same. So going forward, remember the biggest panel here was this action page. I'm still taking my time building mystery with this character doing the slashing of this character's face, and then going into the next page, sorry, into the next panel. There's still some more dialogue and still some building where he's walking up to this guy on the ground, and the guy on the ground is yelling like, stay away from me, you demon, blah 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 blah. And you can see the panels are getting smaller. He's walking towards, and then even this last panel right here, that's the smallest panel. Even the speech balloons, right? You can have style with them. They're a little bit more chaotic because he's yelling. But even the speech balloons in this already small panel are congested, making everything a little bit claustrophobic as he's yelling. And what's happening in that scene, which is over here, right, is he doesn't even finish his line of dialogue. So you can also play around with the dialogue. He doesn't even finish his line of dialogue. And then, if I go back, I make them, even though it's not a page flip, right? You can still do it without the people having to flip a page, but it's best if they're actually, you're making them flip a page. But the next panel is then this big panel finally revealing the character that's slashing, doing all the murdering, and we're getting to see him for the first time, and then his actions are also a reflection of who this kind of character is as well. And that, for this next page, is the biggest panel, because the introduction of the character is also the most important thing to me for the next page. And so the panel size is a reflection of how important the panel is to the page, or how important the moment is to the scene or the story or whatever. And then how you construct that, you can get really creative. You're not going to learn that in one workshop. If I'm being fully honest, it's something that you practice and you keep getting better, and you get feedback and you grow, and then you study other creators to see how they do it and try to put yourself in their shoes to figure out why they make the decisions they make. Because every creator is different. Everybody has their own ways of doing things. There are some mutual lines that everybody crosses, but still everybody takes liberties in how they do things in their own way. So you need to find what works best for you, and a good way is to really understand how others do it as well. Hopefully that answers that as best as I can. But yeah, now we can jump into the actual page stuff. And we're doing a page 2, so it's page 2, and we've decided it's a right page. So you come in here, you go new, and let's say it was 2 pages. Even though we're not going to do page 1 in this workshop, you come down here to comic settings. We could do it on just one image, but I like to show other features. And then you come here, you can name the file whatever you want. The good thing with Clip Studio Paint is that it has a lot of, it has a lot of great dimensions to choose from. The Shueisha, that's similar to what you will find in like the Narutos, the Bleaches. If you're familiar with Shueisha, Kodansha, as where the Attack on Titans, whatever. These are the settings right here. Saturday AM, where Apple Black is published and serialized. This is one I created, right? So you can also create custom dimensions, and we're just going to use that. And then it'll just fill in everything. And then if you go to the bottom, you can then decide left binding. Left binding, that just means it's going to be read from left to right. And our comics are read from left to right because we're published here in the US. And that's just the reading orientation here. Versus in Japan, it's generally right to left. That's why the reading orientation is different over there. But even like the Viz comics, responsible for Naruto, the original manga that they create here is left to right for that reason. So we hit left binding, and then the first page is on the left for our settings, based off of our storyboards. So the first page will be on the left, and we only have, let's just say we only have let's say we have 4 pages. Doesn't matter. Let's say we have 4. Then you hit OK. It'll then create this for you. This is easy to work with. You get to see all the pages at once. It's similar to what's happening over here, where I get to see all the pages I'm working on all at once. So you come here, and where we said was page 2, you go to page 2, and then you can go back to the storyboard. Sometimes what I like to do is I'll skip a step. I'll skip a step to be faster, to make sure I finish my comics faster. Where I just treat my rough sketches as the sketch layer. Sometimes you can have a more detailed, more refined sketch, and that'll make inking easier for you. So you can just ink with a little bit of ease. But I kind of combine my inking and sketching together in a way to save time, but it's something that you also have to get used to. That's why, as you can see, for these pages, I was just inking straight from the rough, extremely rough storyboards. But it's better to have a refined stage if or a refined layer, a refined sketch layer if you're just starting out. But I'll just take these. I'll just copy. I'll go to the page 2 that we have on the side right here. I'll just copy and paste. Just blow it up. Enter. It's not going to be perfect word for word. I might create a new storyboard template that is more that the ratio is perfect for the actual page that I'm working on. But it doesn't matter right now. So I let that come in, and then I reduce the opacity. Now I want to prepare the page before I go in, inking, sketching, and all. So this is the phase where we're now going into the execution. With Clip Studio Paint, it makes it easy. Shortcut U. If you hit shortcut U again, you go to divide frame folder. There's a difference between the frame folder and frame border. I have a YouTube video that breaks everything down. It's like a breakdown on how to make a manga page. You can also watch that, or you can come back and watch this because a lot of this is going to be recorded, or you can watch that as well in addition because there's even more stuff on that, but it'll break all the other features that I can't cover in just one workshop. But you go to frame folder, then you make sure that under view, it's snap to ruler and snap to special ruler. Those are ticked on. That way, in the frame folder, you come in here and what's going on? Okay, that's weird. Why is it doing this? But basically, we're trying to. Oh, that's why. So I'm on the cut frames. Actually, I should be on create frames right here at the top. So create frames, and this is where you get to create the frame. And I'm on a rectangular frame. Usually when I'm creating the frames are just the panels. So when I'm creating a panel, this is a preference. I don't like panels that are circles or triangles. You usually want to be 4 sides and above, but honestly, 4 sides, period. Right? Sometimes you might want to get really crazy and creative with it. Fine. You might want to do a circle. That's fine. I might even do a circle sometimes, but let's keep it simple. It just looks ugly to me. Your rectangle frame, the brush size, I like to have it be at 20, at least 15. So that way the panel lines are thick, and so it'll differentiate itself from, let's say, the lines that you're inking with. And then any other thing? Nope. So now remember the view we had snap to ruler, and this way it will just automatically boom. It's created one frame, and that's what you see here in the layer here. It's created panel 1. Now you can go to cut frame, and on divide frame folder, we can then cut it how we want it to look. So now I'm taking that sketch layer, I've dragged it to the top, reduced the opacity, And before you cut for divide frame folder or even divide frame border, you come here to the vertical gutter. This will keep the spaces for all the vertical gutters and horizontal gutters consistent. So for horizontal gutter, I have it at 200 pixels. Some you can have it at 150, but 200. And then for the vertical gutter, I have it at 50. You want to make sure it's at this setting before you start cutting panels. Once that's there, I come, slice, boom. And then for the other one, slice, boom. So it will then create these additional frame folders. It kind of numbers them in a weird way, where this is panel 1, that's correct. Panel 2 is on the other side, and that might have to do with orientation, but I'll just rename it to be 3, and I'll rename this to be 2, just to stay organized. You want to be as organized as possible, especially if, let's say, for me, sometimes I have manga assistants helping me with backgrounds, and I can show some of that at the end. And I want to make sure that my pages are easy for them to read and understand. So panel 1, 2, 3, right? We decided to bleed panel 1 and 2. So while on it, shortcut O. And I can just, the yellow arrow right here, just tap that and it'll go down. So the first, tap, tap. And then we have it. That's it, right? Now we can go into, the cool thing about the frame folder is that it doesn't matter what we do in this layer. Let's name it ink. And then I go to my real G-Pen, shortcut P, and it doesn't matter what I draw, it's always going to stay within that frame. The difference between frame folder and frame border is that if I did frame border, then yes, it wouldn't go outside of the frame, but if I went down to the other frame below it, then we will see it again. So it wouldn't show up in any of the gutters, but it will continue to show because it's just masked differently, where here it's masked and put in its own folder. We don't want these scribbles, so that's that. And usually to save time, I like to start drawing basically with whatever panel calls my name. But before we do that, let's actually have a sketch layer, keeping it simple. We can give it a color or whatever. And you want to now sketch the character. And as for time purposes, I'm just going to sketch something quick. Right, you see the character, maybe a little bent. I'm even, again, nothing is set in stone until it's final. So here I'm actually going to bend him a little more. So we'll see less of his back of his head. And he's holding his knee. You can pull it down even more again. Maybe one other hand, like, hey, wait up, or something. Do it until it's correct. Don't be afraid. The eraser is your friend. And in digital, Control Z is your friend until you get it right. And then let's say I'm also trying to draw really fast. And let's say the other character shot kind of stops. looking down. Maybe they have a bag. And then that's that. Then the next one is maybe they look up. So there's a little bit of motion. And then they say what they're saying. And it could be, you could have the balloons cover what the character, some of the character, some of the art here and there. And usually with the text balloons, they would be within the frame. But sometimes you want the balloon to really pop, and then it can, pop out of the balloon, out of the frame folder. It's up to you. It's all in the layers. So all you have to do is take whatever the balloon layer is and just put it above the frame folder or within it. It's the same thing when you want to have a character pop out of a panel. It's the same thing. It's just layers. You just have it layered above the frame folder. So you have here, and maybe he's sweating. And he's saying whatever he's saying. Maybe it's two, whatever. So remember, for consistency's sake, remember his one hand is kind of raised. So you want to keep that raised. And then the other final page, final sketch. It's more of like a reaction. During the storyboarding phase or the coming up with the idea, there is a phase where you're coming up with the characters and the character designs. We skipped all of that, but that's the time you would do this. That way you would know what the characters look like already. It'll make things easier. Here, I'm literally coming up with it as I'm sketching.
Hey, Odunze, we have a question about um, uh, panels that I think we'll get to maybe during the Q&A, but we also have a question about speech bubble placement. Do you usually place them within the frame to make it easier to read, or is it simply your preference? Are there kind of some rules that you usually follow with speech bubble placement that you can quickly go over?
So for the placement of the speech balloons, I'll do this. So try to ignore literally everything you guys are seeing. But the quick things, without going into the actual execution of them within Clip Studio Paint, but the main things to keep in mind is that you want to be able to step back and make sure that all the speech balloons are readable. If this was a panel and I had speech balloon here and then here and then here and then here, you don't want it to be too confusing as to which one to read first, right? You want to make sure it's clear. So if I was doing this, I'd make sure it's more of like positioned so they just know to go like so, right? So where you place them, you want to make sure based off of the reading orientation that is placed in very easy to understand. They know which one to read in what order. And then also you'd want to figure that out during the storyboarding phase as well, because there are times where you come up with a page and so for going back to this example here, in because I knew I wanted to use the speech balloons as well to congest the character yelling. I also kept in mind, okay, there's going to be speech balloons here to really close him in, so that you can get really creative with it, and it's very clear which to read first or second or third. Like there is no confusion, and you want to keep that consistent, as well as also the eye, the way you want to guide the eye throughout the page, even without the speech balloons, even for like just the action, right? And so this is page one, panel 1, 2, 3, but it's very easy how it'll guide. Even the blade of the sword kind of guides your eye. So you have this swing, and then it's swinging down, but the next panel is the blade is kind of swinging back up. So you're kind of guiding the reader's eye to a degree, right? In where so it helps decide where you place certain things in the panel, where you place certain speech balloons, and you just want to keep that flow smooth. So that's one thing to keep in mind, right? You want to make sure that wherever you place the speech balloon, it has to be very clear to read and understand. They must know what to read first. If they can't, if they're confused with that, then the immersion of them within this page is kind of lost, and you're pulling them out of the experience. And then, you can get creative with how you form the speech balloons. So for this one, he's yelling, so the speech balloons are spiky. The before that, he was kind of coughing and bleeding out. So the speech balloons, I drew them. These are manually drawn speech balloons, by the way. You can do speech balloons in so many other ways, and I'll show that as time goes on. But these are manually drawn speech balloons where if I go to, say, that page right there, right? They're kind of just doing their own thing. I can turn them off and on. They're on their own layer. But here, say the speech balloon is a little bit coughy and bleeding, so like I'm drawing them in that way. So you can get really creative with it. Sometimes you can even change the font. And if you're curious with what font I'm using here, this is called Wild Words. You can down, I believe it should be available. I didn't have trouble finding it, but it's called Wild Words. But there are a bunch of other good fonts for comics that you can research. I also have a video on how to letter manga, which again, so if this workshop doesn't cover it all, it goes into more detail in that video, and it also gives hints as to what fonts to use, what fonts are available, what fonts other professionals are using, because obviously not everybody's using the same font. So hopefully that answered that question. Now with the balloons being within the panels, I tend to keep them within the panel. The only times I have them popping out of a panel is when the character talking, right? The character that balloon represents is not in the panel. Sometimes you might have somebody talking who's not in the panel that you're drawing. And there are many cases where I'll have that panel pop out, or in some cases where a character is just yelling so loud that I want the balloon to just reflect that. So again, there are no rules. It's up to you. And you just want to make sure you can justify the decisions that you're making, and that you're consistent in your style, that there is a method to your madness. And it's not just your method isn't madness, unless it is, and then you should be able to justify that too. So hopefully that answered that question. Um, so here, and this is just the last. We're not even gonna need to. We're not gonna see her ear, so it doesn't even matter. Excuse me. Female characters, I tend to, for makeup, you should draw some lashes, or at least feminine characters, and then we'll do that. Maybe she can be a little extra shocked. And then that's that. Now we go into inking. First, for backgrounds, I don't have enough time, right? So I could either do a sketch for the background. Sometimes with my manga pages, I would sketch out a background that's detailed enough, and I'll send it over to an assistant to finish if I can't do it myself. But another option is for a quick technique that we can just, for this panel, we can actually grab an image from the materials in Clip Studio Paint. let's say we grabbed this one, blew it up. We blew it up. Let's pull it right here. Right here. Yeah, somewhere here. Okay. Then you can then change the tone, this button right here on the layer effects. Make that tone. The frequency, I increase that to 85. Then you could extract the line to give it line art in a way. And what does this one do? Basically, you play around with the effects until you get what you want. And these are things that just kind of help with that. Like fill now. I'm actually keep it there. What's this? No, we don't want that. But these are things you can do. Let's try this. No. But just keep editing it. And sometimes some people will go over these with lines and they just keep editing it, editing until they have, what they want. And there are many ways to edit it. And I'll have to play around with it a whole lot more to get what we're looking for. But this is one way to do it. In Clip Studio Paint, you can download a bunch of materials from the Clip Studio, what the community, and or you can just create yourself. So let's assume this is the background that we've put together, and that'll kind of also help me figure out how I want this character to be placed and positioned, in a way that makes sense. So we're like right here. Maybe I have one a little higher. Maybe even one on the other side. No, I want it here. That way she also pops in where there's a little hole in the background. And maybe her size again will be a little smaller. Unless I bring her down. Yeah, this could work. This could work. So I'm happy with that. I can reduce the opacity so that I see what's happening. And then I can go ahead and start inking. I can ink the characters, and then I'll do the balloons, and then I'll do sound effects or speed lines, if any, or add effects for any emotions, and then we'll be done with the manga page. So let's see if I can quickly pop that. I'm done with the original rough layer, so I just turn that off. And while I'm doing this, I can be answering any questions that anyone might have.
Yeah, we've got kind of a general question here that if you could try to answer while you are working on the inking. And one of the questions is, what are some of the best exercises that you have tried when you are learning paneling and storytelling? For example, redrawing comics, reading articles, watching videos, things like that. What kind of exercises helped you the most at the beginning of your career?
I would say, which is similar to what I would recommend, is one, get your feet wet and to execute as best as you can, and maybe attempting to write your own stories, but don't try to do anything that's too ambitious, right? Do a short story, a one shot, and then get all the mistakes out of the way. And once you do that, you find whatever that resource is, and it's part of the reason why uh you have all these like portfolio review type situations. in not that I did them, but I'm sure they're very helpful because you get to learn, you get feedback from professionals. And so getting feedback from professionals, not your mom, would go a long way, and then you can start working out the kinks and still, while still practicing. Looking at other resources, YouTube helped me a lot. There are a lot of creative people on YouTube. I have a lot of videos that help, and sometimes even beyond manga making, just film, right? All the video essay stuff, whatever, right? Those can be very helpful because there is that mutual window between film, music videos, whatever the case may be, where they have storyboard artists as well worrying about similar things, right? It might be a little different here and there because, say, for animation or film, maybe they want more frames than usual, or they take the pacing is a little slower. But generally speaking, it's not that different. And so that would help a lot. So a lot of online resources, but mainly practice and looking to have finished products, not just projects, where you can look back and go, you can look back and see your mistakes, and so that the next time you work on a project, you learn from those mistakes, and then you grow. So I would say that's what worked for me, is just drawing a lot, having a lot of room, giving myself a lot of room for trial and error, and also getting feedback online, especially from um, credible sources, people who know what they're talking about. Here for the inking is folds. I have videos that, I have more videos that talk about pretty much every phase of what we've gone over in this workshop. Drawing clothes in certain ways and yada yada yada. And you can see this for those who read manga. You can also see similar things where even the way a lot of manga artists today during this inking phase, they just go really quick because they have like every artist kind of has different deadlines, and so based off of the deadline, sometimes you can tell that maybe they've tweaked their art style to be one that's more conducive to maybe finishing a bunch of pages in a week. And here is no different, but you develop whatever the style is for the project, and then you stick to it. Same thing for vertical form content. So here, if I'm giving him black pants, obviously you could have your manga fully in color, but if we're sticking to what's traditionally done, we're sticking to that. We'll do this in the grayscale black and white. And let's say I turn this off. And I can just select that spot and fill. Do some cross hatching or just hatching.
Odunze, I have a follow-up question for you from the chat. Um, you mentioned that one of the best things you can do is to just create and then to also see if you can get advice from, experienced folks or professionals on your work. Someone in chat has asked, where would be some places to start looking for professional advice on your work? How can you get, the eyes of experienced people on your work to give you feedback?
Like I mentioned, a lot of conventions, Artist Alley, but generally a lot of conventions, have announcements for uh portfolio review. And so you can do that. But if you just search online and you want to find professionals who are doing that, you'd be able to find them. And then you can also reach out to them online. Not everybody's going to respond because everybody's, busy and stuff, but all the creators, most of them are online. You can also build community and have a group of people all learning together. And you guys can also help each other. help each other grow, and all that good stuff. So the online resources are out there. You even have creators who are, maybe they're professionals, but then they're also online creators, and as a result, they have like, maybe some parts of their routine reviewing the art of their audiences. So you can find these people online, but the most popular, most common way is portfolio reviews that wherever they're available, usually at cons, and you can get these from you know all kinds of creators in the industry, whether there be maybe not necessarily manga, but uh, Western creators who work for Marvel, DC, and all that. Are there any more questions?
Yeah, we've got kind of another general question, which is, do you have any kind of, I guess, just basic or generalized advice for someone who's considering making manga for a living?
I would say one, take advantage of like I said, everything we've said so far, online resources, and really put yourself out there, be consistent, and be prepared for luck when it comes. There's gonna be, it's not, especially in the beginning, it's not always going to be rewarding. But yeah, I say the same thing for almost any field, but especially comics. It's not always going to be rewarding until you make a big break, and sometimes that might come 10 years later. So I would say you need the mental fortitude and uh, preparation for that to be the case. You need to be realistic with yourself and what you want out of this. And definitely you need to love what you're doing. Let's say if you're making an original story, it has to be someone that you really love making. And I think that'll help you go a long way. But I would say be prepared for the hardship and have a plan. Have a plan, try to execute it, be consistent, take advantage of social media as best as you can. Be honest with yourself and what your capabilities are, and make sure you're actually growing, not just in reach, but your art, right? Because if your art's really, really good, eventually you will rise to the top in some way. And so I'll start there to make sure your art's actually good. Be consistent, work hard, work smart, and be prepared for luck when it comes. A lot of the opportunities that I've gotten, it's really just that. When I was making my comic, I didn't fully have a plan or know how things would play out, but I focused on making sure that my art continued to grow and I was getting better and all the things that we've talked about, whether it be my storytelling or just art in general, understanding whatever I needed to understand, making use of the internet to grow however I can and just become a better creator. And then eventually people took notice and opportunities started to come my way for all kinds of things. And so you just want to prepare yourself for that luck. And when the luck came for me, for most of it, I was prepared and I took advantage of it. Me even doing this workshop for you guys, that was people, aware of what I've done and reaching out. And, as long as you continue to grow, people take notice. So an element of it is luck. It's being lucky. And luck will come if you're hitting on all cylinders. Like I said, you just need to be prepared for when it does come. If not, it'll pass you by. But essentially, this is what will happen. This is what we'll do. And what I'll do, just in case we don't hit the time, because I'm sure it's going to be we're getting to it. But you would ink that panel, ink all the panels, ink everything. I would have a separate layer for the balloon right here, where where he says finally says maybe he says yep. So this would be the balloon. I like to have sharper edge, so I'll erase that, right? You could create this with a vector layer, but I do it with raster to save time. And shortcut G. Uh, I refer to only the layer I'm on this new layer called balloon, and I just fill in white, but actually right here, fill in white. But actually, before I do that, I create the balloon tail. Fill in white, then shortcut T for text. And maybe her name is what? Just happened. So it's on circular text, right? We don't want that. You want to be on text. And then say her name is Margot. And so he's yelling her name. I change it from this is wild words to say wild word bold. The font size, you always want the fonts. You don't want to go below 9. You never really want to go below 9, but there isn't any fixed, like anything here, like I mentioned. You can do whatever you want. So I keep it high. Yes, Margot, you know, wait up. Maybe I reduced it a little bit. And so now go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to give you a time update. We've got about 5 minutes or so until we get to the about 10 minutes left that we reserved for Q&A.
Yeah.
We have kind of been doing Q&A throughout. We do have a few other questions that I was going to get to at the end, but
Yeah,
um,
I think while I'm doing this, I can combine that with a Q&A because a lot of this, like the inking, is going to be straightforward. But that'll be after I've done this and a few little thing I want to show with toning. But after that, toning and maybe a speech balloon thing, I can answer the Q&As as we're going right now.
all right. Well, the next question we have is if you have any advice for someone who can draw but doesn't really want to draw the manga but would rather do the writer, like maybe write it as a light novel.
Um, I mean, if you're sure that that's what you want to do, you don't want to draw, then I guess I would assume you have your answer right there. Um, maybe you just want to draw the covers or whatever. You can do just that, but then I would put a lot of energy in figuring out how to write, because especially writing prose, that's not something that's very easy to do. But if you're good at that, then I'll just start working on that. Funny enough, we have a Apple Black light novel right here. And for the light novel, I'm not that well versed in prose and I don't have time to go learn that. So this was written by Stephanie Williams, and she's done some work with Marvel and DC as well. And she was in charge of that while working. Basically, I did the story that was like a skeleton of it, and then she came in with the meat. And there are some images here and there that you would find in, most light novels. And we have a light novel here. It's a prequel story in Apple Black. Highly recommend you guys go check it out. It just dropped, so it has just one review on Amazon. But you can check out all the other. I appreciate it if everybody on here, goes out to get the books. Apple Black Volume 1 to 4. 1 to 4 is already available, and then the fifth comes out currently set for um, currently set for October. And the first season you could say in many ways is, arc one, and the whole so far has been received very well. And I'll be able to take the next question.
All right, I think I understand this question, but they're asking, do you think there are some standards of style that is necessary to make its way into manga? They're asking maybe levels of anatomy knowledge or particular mediums that should be used or types of characters or a certain amount of level of world building? I guess they're kind of asking, are there some norms that should be followed? You know, earlier you mentioned you can kind of do whatever and there's no real rules, but are there some standards, do you think?
I would say ultimately, no. Ultimately, no. Especially if, let's say you do something completely left field, but it sold 1 million copies. No one's gonna, in fact, people will start to copy you. So technically, no. But for anything, whether it's the Japanese approach to making comics or the Western or the Korean, whatever the case may be, it's always best to know the rules before you break them. It's always best to have a strong foundation before you start to, bend anything. And so as a result, I would advise you do extensive research on how to world build and how to write and storytelling techniques visually and also from a narrative standpoint, and then understanding basic anatomy before you choose to then draw 3 fingers instead of 5 on purpose. So I would recommend you do understand the basics for anything. But even after you do that, can you do whatever you want? I would say yes. And everyone, you know, you just start to create your own lane in that way. There are a lot of art styles that we haven't seen before that start to come to the forefront, and that's just the way it's always been.
We've got another question that I think is thematically related to what you're doing right now is how do you decide where to put sound effects?
It's the same thing with the speech balloons. It's usually you want it to be close to where the sound is actually originating. And then the size of the like you can see the slash right here. And I when I'm creating my own sound effects, I usually stay away from the vowels. Um, but for that onomatopoeia, but whatever's pow, so, pow does have a vowel, but you can do whatever you want. But the size and the placement, I usually put it close to where it's originating, and then how loud I imagine it's going to be is tied to how big I have the sound effect showing. Now for this, I'm going to show something real quick when it comes to adding screen tones. You can, let's say, I want to select the part of the shirt. I hit that. It could be noise. It will give you this option because you hit over here. When you select, it'll give you this bar. You can go on the new tone and then you can play around with these settings to get the desired tone you want. But regardless of what tone you create, if you hit OK, it will fill in that spot. It will fill in that spot, and then you can then choose to it will create a new layer for the tone you just created. And then anything you do on that layer is going to be in that tone. And since we're still here, I can erase parts of it because I actually don't want it to fill the whole thing. And then I can select, just I only want it in that top area. But that's the same approach for anything, really. If I wanted this character to maybe be black, I could fill that. Maybe I'll go to circle and then I hit OK. And then it created a new one. And you can rename it as well. So if I just name this skin, and then anything I do in that layer, same rules. Sometimes when I have like the character's black pants, I might actually fill that in as well with tone. And that could be, you can change it from circle to square. The difference is not too much, but it'll do that. And it'll create a new layer for that as well. And we can name that, I don't know, clothes. And I'm just filling in all the whites over there. You can still mess with the settings afterwards. If you're on that layer, you come up here, you see frequency, density. The higher the density, the darker it's going to be. So I usually have my density at 30. And then for clothes,
So I've got another quick question for you from chat, Odunze. Someone's asking, do you write a traditional script for each chapter?
Yes. Well, I don't know. I'm not sure what you mean by traditional script, but I do write a script where there is narration and dialogue. narration dialogue, and I split it into pages. Honestly, for me, I split it into um, pages of odd numbers, so I know where page one ends, I know where page three, five, seven, and that's just because I know that's where the page flip happens. So that way, when I'm storyboarding the both pages of a spread at once with the intent to do it in such a way I'm getting them to keep flipping the pages. But I have a script for each chapter, and I like to have everything planned out to a degree. I also have a video on that. How much of your story do you need figured out before you start drawing? There's also a video that goes into that. There are a lot of elements when it comes to making comics, and we could be here forever. But try to do the best I can in one workshop. But technically, yes. And let's keep
We
thinking.
only have a couple more minutes, but we do have another question. Do you have advice for someone who's good at character drawings but not as good at drawing backgrounds?
You could hire help. You could hire help, or I think you can always improve on that the same way you were. A lot of times for backgrounds, I think a lot of it's you just don't, they're tedious. Trust me, I know. And so sometimes you just don't want to draw them, but you could definitely get good at them, same with anything else. And so you'd be able to do that, or you can um, hire some help and that will be sorted. But the best advice I could think of would be to get better at it, and that'll also come with practice. And another thing would be to maybe study other creators again, and you see what they do, because there are a lot of creators who are not good at it. If you look at go look at your favorites shonen series. The main artist mostly focuses on just the characters. A lot of times, the art is done by someone completely different, and you can tell in the art style, right? The backgrounds would be the most detailed, whatever, and then the characters would be drawn in a completely different art style. It's very, very, very common thing. So it's not uncommon to have a completely different person do backgrounds. But the other approach is what shouldn't shock you. It's just to practice and get good at it. Study your favorite, study your favorite artists and see what they do. And shoot, maybe they don't even do their own backgrounds. But the usual suspect is a lot of artists don't like backgrounds because that's not what they care about. They care about the characters. But I would also argue though that you should care about the backgrounds because in some cases the backgrounds are kind of like characters of their own. And so, you want to keep that in mind when you're putting together work, right? Sometimes the places have character and they are very memorable, and maybe the fans take a liking to it. And if you're really big, and make a theme park and all those kind of things, so they're just as important. And my advice is to get used to it, especially if you want to be a comic creator. Either you get used to it or you have some kind of creative alternative to solve that problem. Easy fix, like I said, is to just hire help.
All right, we have time for one last question, which is, do you have any tips for making more diverse faces and expressions?
A tip for that would be a tip for that is usually when I'm doing creative starting out, it helps you see things is to what helps is to see things in layers, right? So you can take a face and do focus on just the expression versus the character's face. And so if the expression was something like this, then just try to make this translation, focus on this, and just translate this to the character in question. And you can be as expressive as you want with the emoji. And then just try to keep that same energy for an actual character face, or a human face, or an elf, whoever this person is. And so the quick advice, quick tip I can give is just to focus on one thing at a time and get as expressive as you want in a simplistic form before you start thinking about it in more complex ways.
All right, thank you so much. And with that, we are actually basically at the end of our time here. So unfortunately, we didn't have time to get to the rest of this page, but I think your process and explanation showing all the different steps from storyboarding to the sketch to ink to word balloons and everything else has been extremely insightful and informative. There's a few other questions we couldn't get to. And I want to point folks to a couple different places, including the Wacom blog, where we have an interview with Whyt Manga, who's gave a bunch more insight, and also your YouTube and your other social media sites that have a bunch of more resources there as well. I have a couple things that I want to share with everybody who's in attendance before we close out for the day. If you are interested in getting a Wacom device like the one that Whyt Manga was using or one of our many other products, the best place to do that is at the Wacom eStore. And we have a special discount code for everyone who attended the session. It is summer savings, 15% off of Wacom 113 Touch, Intuos Pro Small, Intuos Pro Medium, or our newest OLED professional pen display, the Wacom Move Ink. Thank you so much, Odunze, for this workshop. It was a pleasure to have you, and we really appreciate you taking the time.
Awesome, man. Thanks for having me.